Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Brawn Body Health and Fitness Podcast. Today I'm joined by Coach Joey Greany. Joey has over 2 decades of experience in the MLB working as a strength coach with a variety of organizations. Today we're going to be discussing developing rotational power and rotational explosiveness for baseball athletes. So baseball, when you look at pitchers, hitters, throwing, it's very rotationally dominant. So we discuss different things you can do to assess power in the rotational element, in addition to training rotational power. Great episode for anyone who works with a lot of baseball players. Enjoy. Joey, welcome to the podcast. I'm super excited to work with you today, man. Thanks for being here.
Daniel, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, for people who might not be familiar with you, would you mind filling them in a little bit about who you are, your backstory, and all the amazing stuff you've been doing in the world of professional baseball?
Okay, yeah. So my name is Joey Greany. I've worked in professional baseball now for about 2 decades. It feels like yesterday, but that I started. But yeah, about 2 decades working with the elite professional athletes. From with strength training, speed training, mobility, agility. So I've been doing that now for quite some time. I was always interested in athletics, baseball specifically, martial arts backgrounds. So I was always interested in the fitness side of things, performance side of things, sports science side of things. So I went to school, studied exercise science, physical education, played sports in college. And then in 2008, I took a job with the Kansas City Royals for their minor league affiliate. I worked with them for 9 seasons. Some amazing people over there in that organization. And then in 2017, came over to Tampa Bay with the Major League Club and been there ever since. It's been a great experience. Met so many great people along the way, coaches, front office, and players.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's an incredible journey. And, it's awesome for you having almost 2 decades or over 2 decades of experience in the professional baseball world. I'd imagine you've kind of gotten to see a little bit of everything in that time. And one of the things I noticed, I grew up watching baseball. I was never that good as an athlete myself in the sport of baseball, but really fun sport to watch. We call it America's pastime, but it's a very rotation-based sport. Pitching is rotational in nature. Hitting the ball is rotational in nature. Throwing the ball, if you're an outfielder, infielder, whatever, it's got a rotational element to it. And I think it's really important to excel in the sport like baseball to have the ability to produce really good rotational power, or I guess we could call it rotational explosiveness, for lack of a better way to put it. So first off, I think it's really essential to assess someone before you get into the training side of things. If you're going to start working with someone to help develop power and explosiveness in rotation, what kind of things are you looking at right off the bat? What kind of assessments do you use? That sort of thing.
Daniel, yes, great question. Rotational is the name of the game. Rotational power, rotational explosiveness, like you said. So our assessments are fairly basic, mostly done from our sports science and medical team as far as the assessments go. But the hips play a major role in creating that rotational power. Your thoracic spine also plays a major role in creating that rotational power explosiveness. So they go through a number of tests on hip internal rotation, external rotation, and the thoracic mobility. From that, we'll get this information for each and every individual athlete on our team. And then we like to incorporate certain exercises as far as mobility at the hips or in the T-spine, and then rotational power work. A lot of it is with the medicine ball, believe it or not, to create some of that torque and that rotational power. In season, we tend not to continue to add rotational exercise to our athletes just because, like you said, the pitchers constantly rotating, they're throwing. There's so many swings done each and every day, each and every week, each and every month. So we kind of limit the amount of rotation you're doing in the weight room during the season, but in the off-season months, especially as we lead up to spring training, to build some of that rotational endurance, and that rotational power. Um, we make sure our athletes are incorporating that into their training prior to coming to spring training.
What would you say the most common deficit out of those that you mentioned is that you see? You know, is it mostly like a thoracic extend and rotation combination or more of like a hip internal rotation? What kind of things are you typically seeing?
Yeah, I would say it's a combination of both, but probably more in the hips. Having some, um, hip restriction somewhere, or not being able to load into their glutes properly. I would say probably the hips. I mean, maybe that has a lot to do with, the way they're sitting nowadays, and, at the majorly over the travel with the buses, the planes, sitting, long periods of time at the hotel or at home sitting. But yeah, I would say the rotational aspect in the hips, not being able to load on that glute, um, would be the most factor that hinders most of our athletes.
Yeah, no, I can definitely understand why that would be. And as you mentioned, from travel schedule to the fact that, baseball is the only professional sport I've seen where there's 162 games in the season. So I'd imagine there's quite some gnarly changes that you would see if you assessed an athlete before competition or after competition, or before the season starts and after the season starts. That level of volume can certainly have a drastic effect, I would imagine.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, baseball's not like any other sport. We play a long season, so many games. And what people fail to realize is that, they play every single night. We have a game every single night, but prior to that game, we also have practice. So that, the players are there hours before the game starts. They're in the weight room, they're in the training room, they're working with our sports science team, mental performance team, they're watching video. So there's a lot going on prior to the game. And you take into account all the ground balls that they're taking, or fly balls, and all the swings in the cage prior to the game. That all adds up as far as the workload goes. So we have to keep that in mind. Each and every player responds to training differently, responds to games differently. So we have to keep that in mind when they come into the weight room, and make adjustments when necessary. The sport is secondary, or the weight room is secondary to the sport in season. So we're just managing strength and power levels, while also keeping mindful of, fatigue, and recovery.
Yeah, definitely. I love that you brought that up, managing strength and power levels. How do you go about assessing those in season, out of season? Is there kind of like a test battery that you like to assess those? Or how do you, I guess, show progression or regression over time in those metrics?
Yeah. So what I like to do, in our staff, but I'll speak for myself, and mostly in the weight room, we like to just keep it simple and basic. There's so many different ways you can go about testing an athlete's readiness from a neuromuscular standpoint, overall fatigue standpoint. But we like to just use simple force plates or a jump mat and be able to get consistent numbers throughout the year on our players. And that seemed to work well. And guys like it. We actually just add it into the workout itself. So when they come into the workout, after we do a little warm up, we start them on their main movements or their main lifts. Then we'll have them do some explosive jumps, mostly the counter movement jump. In spring training, we do a number of different tests and jumps on force plates. But during the season, we strictly just use the counter movement jump, and that gives us some good information to be able to track over time, and to adjust their training accordingly, and to see if this player is trending up, trending down, or kind of maintaining, staying the same.
Yeah, definitely. I love that. And I certainly think there's a lot of value in the force plates because movement essentially starts from the ground up, and rotation is no exception from that. If you aren't firing off your foot and allowing your feet to move, then, I like to think your swing or throwing motion or whatever we're looking at is going to look pretty funky. So I certainly love the ground up assessment to force. How do you go about getting into the training a little bit? You mentioned that you really like using med balls in rotational power development and power programming. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah. Med balls are simple to use. Most weight rooms have them. We also got to keep in mind when we travel, we're not in our home gym. So when we go to, visiting clubhouses, visiting gyms, we're on the road. Most likely they have some med ball, so we can get some rotational work in. Um, I like to use catch and tosses. So where you toss the med ball to an athlete, they have to be able to decelerate the weight of the med ball and then quickly stop it and create force. So I like using a lot of those, or hip tosses into the wall, being able to load that glute like I was talking about, and explosively, accelerate those hips forward into hip extension. So I like to incorporate those. But again, I like to keep everything basic in the weight room, basic with these players, especially in season. And when you're working with older individuals, older athletes, you have to constantly adjust their program.
Yeah, no, definitely. And the med ball is interesting to me because essentially it's a weighted ball, and our, line of force or resistance, I guess you could say, is gravity pulling the ball downwards. And our horizontal power vector is kind of perpendicular to that, I guess you could say. So it's interesting to me because I would say that the med ball is probably one of the most widely used rotational power developing tools, I'll call it, that I see. But to me, it almost seems like the vector is more vertical against gravity instead of horizontal. Do you feel like there's a place for, say, like cables or bands or something along those lines in the, rotational power program development, I'll say, providing more of like a horizontal force vector as well, or?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we use a lot of cables and bands in our training also. Um, a lot more for the stability aspect. We do have Kaiser makes a good product where there's no slack on the band, on the tension, so you can quickly generate a lot of force without that added kickback or slack. So and there's more companies coming out with good products. But yeah, we also incorporate the bands and the cables into our rotational training. Again, mostly in the off season, but
Yeah.
however, we do sprinkle a little bit in during the season.
I love that. I love that. And as you mentioned before, too, it kind of sounds like there's a lot of cueing and control work that goes into play. I'd imagine most of the individuals you work with at the professional level, they probably have quite a bit of horsepower and just brute strength. And that's probably pretty easy to develop over time. But having the ability to load correctly, as you mentioned, and cue specific things, I'd imagine that's really where you notice the big difference or the most bang for your buck in rotation.
Yes, absolutely. These players, they're at the top of their game. They're the top 1%. There's a reason why they're at the highest level of sport. But considering that there is some, small details that each athlete still needs to work on each and every day is, whether it's hip internal rotation, external rotation, you really got to create, you have to get creative. There's more advanced training, adding in pauses, working on eccentrics, rapid eccentrics with certain players to generate more force. So, at the highest level of sport, you really got to be creative. You really got to tap into some of that advanced training, and figure out how each and every player, adapts and adjusts to training.
Yeah, definitely. Walk me through, if you won't mind, what's a typical session would you look like if your goal is to develop rotational power? What kind of things are you including, not including, warming up with, that sort of thing?
Yeah, so like our rotational power training or programming, we sprinkle that into our workouts. So it would just be developed, and programmed into our overall strength training workout for the day. So a player will come in season, they'll do some warm up, some mobility work. We'll do some nervous system activation, maybe some jumps on the force plate, or some, maybe some lateral explosiveness work. And then we'll go into our main movement for the day. And perhaps on that main movement, we'll superset it with a rotational aspect. It could be a rotational hip toss, it could be a rotational cable rotation. So we just sprinkle in any of that rotational development work, explosive work within our workout itself. And, that goes for, the mobility and flexibility. We like to just sprinkle it all in. into the workout, get these players in, get them feeling good. So that way, when they leave the weight room, they feel better than when they came in, and then they can go into hitting, fielding, and get ready for the game.
I like that. I like that. And, what I really like about that is it kind of hits a little bit of the load management side as well when you're sprinkling a lot of little things in there. As you mentioned before, if you just go into a session and you crush an hour of rotation only work, and then you go and play a sport that's very rotationally dominant, I'd imagine it's pretty easy to kind of overreach a little bit and hit a point of diminishing returns. So I think that kind of approach that you just outlined really emphasizes a focus on quality instead of quantity with this line. And I think that's something a lot of people, especially in the baseball world, have a difficult time understanding, that sometimes it's not about how much you do, but how well you do it, if that makes sense.
Yes, that makes total sense. And it's important to note too that, maybe that these players, they don't do rotational aspects earlier in the day. They may wait up until game time to come into the weight room prior to going out to the game. Maybe 30 minutes before the game, they'll come in and do some rotational explosive work in the weight room, and then go out onto the field, get some sprints in, and then they're ready for the game. So, that's one thing also to keep in mind is, the timing of this rotational training. So they're getting the rotational training in, but they're also using this rotational training aspect as to prepare them for the game also.
Yeah, almost like a potentiation, I guess you could call it.
Yeah. Yep. Warm up, potentiation, just kind of get their nervous system going, get their body ready to go out and compete at a high level.
Gotcha. And you said for the most part, that's a pretty simple, quick routine that they're using for that. It's not something any long, lengthy thing. And, we recently had this discussion on a baseball podcast with Nate Denning, Eric DeGatti, and Justin Taylor, where we were discussing the importance of an arm care routine and just some simple, 10-minute routine that you can do for your arms. It sounds like you can literally do the exact same thing for more of a hip rotational type thing before your game, and it sounds like it's going to lead to a lot of benefit.
Absolutely, yeah. I would program that in prior to the game. Rotational work, explosive work, get your body ready to go out and compete. And I've seen over the course of a number of years that work well for many athletes.
How important do you feel like the disassociation of movement is in rotation, and how do you like to cue that? If I want to, help someone engage and really feel that hip rotation and glute drive, but I don't really like, where do I come into the hip rotation separation from the shoulder movement to throw a ball, and how do you go about liking to cue that athlete to really sink into that hip and feel it move in separation from the shoulder?
Yeah, the hip shoulder separation is a huge component. I like to ground the hips and rotate the upper body. I feel that has helped our players be able to really feel that hip shoulder separation is grounding the lower half while rotating the upper torso. You can also use bands or bungees to help assist that player to feel that movement. But it does take some time to develop, especially at the lower levels. The higher levels, not so much. But it's something that they can also add into their prep routine prior to throwing. If we're talking about pitchers or position players, frankly, they can add that hip shoulder separation work prior to going into the batting cage or into batting practice. But yeah, it doesn't take much time.
Yeah, no, definitely. And, thinking about this too, I realize there's probably a baseball parent somewhere who's listening to this and they're saying, you know what, like, I'm going to take this and I'm going to apply this to my, 9-year-old son who's playing baseball or something like that. How would you take what you guys are doing on a professional level and maybe scale it down to what we would want to see at more of like the youth and development level? Because I've found youth and development level in baseball it's a very interesting world. And I think that, at least personally, I think that simplicity is certainly valuable there.
Yeah. So for any parents, coaches who work with young athletes, maybe your son or daughter who's an athlete, strictly focus on the basics. Focus on, getting stronger with resistance training, sprinting, is also very important to have your young athletes get outside and have them sprint to max speeds, perform plyometrics, different jumping, either horizontal, vertical, lateral, or perhaps rotational. Um, and then, the last one, simply, you can move lightweight fast. So, it really comes down to just getting stronger and focusing on the basics, performing basic strength training exercise, even if you take them, to the local YMCA and just use the machines for the very, very young, athletes, who are competing to get them stronger and not so much strengthening their muscles, but also strengthening their tendons, ligaments, and bone, which is very important, at the youth levels.
So you mean to tell me that just chasing a bench press PR every week is not going to fully prepare me for baseball, Joey? Really?
Yeah, and I've been there. I've been in the, high school weight room. I've seen the kids, look over to their friend and they're like, oh, my friend's putting on, this much weight. I got to keep up with them. And, focus on your unique development. Don't look over to your friend and try to keep up with them. Focus on you, focus on good form, and proper technique, and stick to the basics and be consistent. And over time, you will get stronger, you will get faster, you will have improved performance. But at the youth level, you really have to slow cook them, so to speak. Take that slow cooker approach, and it's more about development. I think in terms of years, but continue to train year round too. I think a lot of times at the youth level, they get into their sport and they just abandon, their training altogether. They stop doing resistance training, they stop doing max effort sprints or plyometrics. So you need to make sure you're training year round.
Yeah, I love that answer. And it's great that you bring that up here, Joey. I think in general, there's so much value in consistency. And just like you progress throughout, say grade school as you're growing up, your baseball development should probably follow a comparable progression. I think every younger baseball player wants to just be the one throwing absolute gas off the pitching mound. If you throw 90, 95, you get scholarship offers. And then if you throw 98, you get big league offers or something like that. When in reality, in order to get there, it's not just a overnight success. It's not just snap of the fingers. It's small things done repeatedly and consistently over a long period of time. And I think that if you buy into physical training, especially as it comes to rotation, the same way, then you're more likely to succeed long term. Instead of going in and trying to set all your PRs and just do everything from day one, start small and progress over time. Master the basic things when you're young. When you're 10, 12 years old, if you can really master calisthenics based body weight movement, you're probably going to be ahead of everyone else your age. And then once you start to age up and you start incorporating some of these other things we talked about, whether that be the med ball rotational work, whether that be some rotational work or anti-rotational work with a band or a cable, and mixing in some well done GPP, whether that's free weights or machines or that sort of thing, I think that will really lay a foundation for your long-term success, as opposed to just going at it a million miles an hour and just chasing that goal of throw as fast as we possibly can.
Yes, absolutely. You hit the nail on the head right there, Daniel. Yeah, it all comes down to being consistent, looking long term, focusing on form and technique, being patient. And I mean it takes time. It takes years, and it's sometimes decades. To go through that youth development into high school, into college, and into the professional setting. But yeah, it all starts at that youth level. And it's very important. So these parents, the coaches, they have a very important job of building athleticism in their young athletes.
Along those lines, I have a interesting question to ask you, Joey. After this season wraps up and ends, maybe you guys end up making a deep run into playoffs, winning the World Series. Maybe it wraps up before then. I'm not 100% sure. But when the season ends, what are your athletes going to be doing for the first week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks postseason?
Yeah, I would say the majority of them will go home, spend time with their families. A lot of them will probably go on vacation or just kind of, lay low for a little while, kind of let their body kind of just recover and just be a normal person. Um, for about a few weeks, and then they'll start their training back up again. But
So,
we tell them during that time, just uh, you know, it's like an active recovery period. We tell them just to be active, go for bike rides, go for a run, go play another sport, maybe tennis, maybe do something just that's active. Riding a bike, walking. If they do go to the weight room, they can just do random machine work, sets of 10, 20, very light weights, and just keep their body going, keep their muscles engaged. And then after a few weeks, then we'll start our training back up again. But yeah, it's time to really let down after the season.
so you mean to tell me that professional baseball players who, some of who have multi-million-dollar contracts don't have a baseball in hand and they're not all gas and no breaks year round? Like they actually take time off from their sport, really?
Yeah, believe it or not. I mean, it's hard to believe, especially when you do talk to some coaches and parents at the youth level. It's year round, nonstop playing their actual sport. From a performance side, we look at it. Okay, we're going to train year round, but including in that training is a period of active rest or active recovery, and that's what I'm talking about here. Is to go and do other sports, go for bike ride, do stuff that you don't normally do. Play volleyball, pick up different hobbies. There's so much you can do. Do random exercises in the weight room under control, um, uh, obviously. But yeah, there is, quite a bit of downtime.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that speaks to a much more long-term mindset, mentally and physically, it gives your body a chance to recover. It gets mentally exhausting doing the same thing over and over and over again for every single day. On top of that, physically, your body will adapt and change based on the stresses you apply to it. I believe it was a study done on Japanese youth baseball players. I believe it was Japanese, where they looked at their throwing versus their non-throwing shoulder, and they found adaptive changes in the shoulder biomechanics. Like the glenohumeral joint literally changes its morphology in response to the amount of throwing that they were doing. So you're talking about potentially like body altering levels of stress here, doing this sort of thing day after day after day. So I certainly love the fact that, you look at this and you say, what, it's important to take time off. And tying this back to rotational power for a second, I have a feeling if you're tracking and assessing rotational power and you have someone who's psychologically tapped out, who's just mentally and physically exhausted, and they're at the end point of their season, their rotational metrics are going to be a lot lower and their overall movement quality is probably going to be a lot more poor than someone who's taken time to, for lack of a better way to put it, recharge the batteries.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they're mentally checked out at that point, and with that, comes with fatigue comes possible injuries. So you got to keep that in mind too. But yeah, it's extremely important to take some time off. And a lot of our athletes won't pick up a ball or a bat till probably December sometime. So they're giving themselves at least a good month and a half, without any throwing, swinging a bat, and that's their time to really start preparing themselves physically for spring training and the season. And they can really get into some good quality training during that time and not have to worry about being sore, being fatigued to go out and play a sport. So it's a good time to really, really push your athletes too. But they do need that time off in the beginning prior to restarting their training.
Definitely, definitely. I couldn't agree more. Joey, I feel like we've had a great conversation today in relation to rotational power development and how load management plays into that as well. Do you have any kind of closing thoughts or closing remarks or anything we didn't quite catch on the podcast today?
I think we've hit it all. We've hit the rotational. We've hit, training for explosive power in youth athletics. The biggest thing is to get strong. The stronger you are, the more force you're able to generate. So it all starts with strength. And I like saying, rising tide lifts all ships. And, strength training is that rising tide. So the stronger you are, the more explosive you can become, the more capable you are of changing direction in that aspect. And, same with the first step quickness. It all starts with being strong, working on those different angles, adding some resisted running in to your workouts, either with practice or just within your workouts in general, and focusing on that horizontal force and vertical force to help reduce speed and first step quickness.
Yep, I love that. I love that. Joey, for people who want to reach out to you, find out more about you and stay in touch, where can they find you at? Are you on social media at all?
Yes, I'm on social media. They can reach out, DM me, on Instagram or X at just Joey Greany, JoeyGreany, or my email also is just joeygreany@gmail.com. They can reach out to me there. Any questions, I'd be happy to help any parents, youth coaches, in their quest to develop the young athletes.
Yeah, definitely. We'll link to that in the description below as well. For someone who's been in the game for 20 plus years there, Joey, I'm surprised you didn't say that you have a MySpace page still.
Yeah, no, I haven't. I had never even set one of those up. So I was probably too busy training or playing at that time. But yeah, mostly I stick to those two social channels, and I'm more than happy to help.
Love that. Love that. Joey, I really appreciate your time and everything you've done for us here today. Thank you so much.
Hey, thanks for having me, Daniel. Appreciate it.
Hey everyone, I want to take a second and tell you all about AliRx. AliRx is a at-home food sensitivity and gut health testing panel. You order online and then receive and complete your test at home for food sensitivities. You then receive a custom report online through your member portal, and then receive personalized recipes and supplements that are catered to you based on your food sensitivities. If this is something that interests you, you can check out the link and description in my bio, and you can use the coupon code capital D, capital B, RAUN, capital RX, so D Brawn RX, at checkout to save yourself 20%. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Brawn Body Health and Fitness Podcast. If you liked this episode, please make sure to share it with a friend, subscribe so you don't miss any of our upcoming episodes, and leave a review. This way we can spread knowledge and motivation and help reach more people. Thank you again for listening, and I'll see you next time.